Hello, Champagne Rugby podcast and Champagners. On this week's episode of the Champagne Rugby podcast, we are joined by Ellaine Gelman, who is the host, organiser of the Lit Sevens and has a deep, extensive background in all things rugby, from grassroots to playing for London Wasps, and overall legend of the game, helping to grow grassroots and amateur rugby in the UK. Ellaine, how are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Why don't you just kick off the podcast by giving us a quick introduction for those that aren't aware with the work you've been doing and how you got into rugby, just to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started playing actually in the US at university level, and then went on to play for the Oxford Blues whilst I was studying in the UK. Had a brief stint at Wasps, and then played for some local clubs before sort of starting Find Rugby Now sevens teams, for which I've played over the last few years until I became injured. And yeah, just absolutely love the game. At the moment playing a bit of tag rugby as well. So I've had a stint at sort of sevens, 15s, and tag.
So what is your sort of who is Ellaine Gelman for those that don't know?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the founder of Find Rugby Now and Lit Sevens, and I am also a lawyer on the side, and work for an esports company. So very much sporting in all aspects.
And what is Find Rugby Now?
Yeah, so Find Rugby Now was started 12 years ago. Basically, I had made kind of a transition from playing at for the Blues and Wasps to playing for some local sides. I actually was kind of starting qualifying as a lawyer. I didn't really have very much time to commute, to training, etc. And what I found was the local clubs at that time were just not very well connected with other teams in their area. It was really hard for them to kind of schedule fixtures and for new players, it was difficult to find out, where do I buy rugby kit, or where can I watch women's rugby. So it kind of came from just the need in the community at the time, at least in the London area, and in the UK, to kind of get connected to rugby essentially. And so, we started it as a search engine. You could put your postcode in and you can find your local clubs, pubs, and shops. And then that expanded, and we started having different kind of writers and international players and coaches writing for the website, with all times kind of being the focus being amateur rugby. So even if they were writing about the results of an England match that weekend, the focus would always be amateur rugby. And that's kind of how Find Rugby Now began. It was obviously before the RFU had a club portal. And over time, it sort of expanded. We then began a men's and women's rugby sevens team, with the purpose of, again, kind of focusing on amateur rugby, but trying to help create a platform for players that want to play at that elite level. So giving an opportunity for them to kind of dip their toe in, play for a more professionally run team, go and do tournaments all around the world, and get some experience there. And then we expanded to run the Lit Sevens tournament, which for the last 8 years has been at Wasps. And then this past year, we've grown to essentially include some additional clubs in our setup with the Lit Seven series. So it's a series of 5 events over the course of the summer, during which rugby teams can essentially progress and grow, and then win for the coveted title of the best amateur sevens team in the UK. So that's kind of what's been on the agenda on the amateur side. And then recently, we've also put in the diary a date on the 25th of May at AFC Wimbledon to kind of replace the London Sevens event that used to take place at Twickenham. So that's more of a project on the professional side that we're dipping our toe into this year, which has been a bit of a challenge. But amateur rugby still is definitely at the heart of what we do.
So to kind of break it down and fully understand, you've got the Lit Sevens series, which is 5 events throughout the year for amateur rugby clubs, and then the Lit Sevens London Sevens. That's going to be essentially a big staple event to replace the original London Sevens of the HSBC series.
Absolutely right. Yeah, there is some crossover. So we do get some, some elite teams competing at Lit Sevens and some of the other events. We've had China Sevens compete. We have, the British Army and, Shogun Rugby and a lot of these teams. A few who will be actually competing at the Lit Sevens, London Sevens on the 25th. But it is very much, a community game. Whereas the stadium event will be, feature sort of what you would expect at a big stadium event. We've got, James Haskell DJing the after party. We've got, dance performances, and, fancy dress and all these other fun bits that Rugby Sevens usually comes with.
And with the London, you mentioned the China Sevens team there. As you know, China is quite plays a big role in my sort of interest in rugby in Asia. For those that don't know, I quit my job and booked a one-way flight to make a documentary about rugby in China. Have you got the Chinese Sevens team coming over to play this year as well?
We don't. So the year we had it, Ollie Phillips and Dan Norton were the coaches.
Oh
And I
yeah,
think they were in England at the time, and the timings just worked out really well. We did obviously invite the Chinese team and Hong Kong to come down to the Lit Sevens, London Sevens. We couldn't quite make it work this year, but we definitely hope to have them back. I mean, I can see, I've personally seen how much, rugby has, and rugby seven specifically, has grown in Asia. We took a women's team out to Hong Kong Tens just a couple of weeks ago, and went to the Hong Kong Sevens to watch that phenomenal event. So yeah, it's been phenomenal to see how much money and resources going into growing the sport there, and in particular, interesting to see how many expats are over there playing and helping to improve the game, and how many women are getting opportunities to go and play there and get that experience. So, yeah, it's very interesting.
yeah. What's fascinating about Asia is rugby in Asia is seen primarily as a gender neutral sport. So when I was in sort of Vietnam, Cambodia, countries where there's not a lot of rugby, there was like there were groups of players that played, and they were all women. And I asked them, "Why are you guys playing rugby?" They said, "Oh, we see it as a gen." They tested different sports, so they tested football, basketball, rugby, and they were put into like a because there was this charity that was introducing sports to it's like sports for good sort of thing, and they asked the women. They tested all the different sports, and then all the women ended up playing rugby and carrying that on, and all the men did football. And they did a research and they interviewed the women afterwards, and they said, "Oh, why are you playing rugby?" And the reason is they saw rugby as a gender neutral sport. So it's really interesting that a sport that's completely foreign has no negative, positive, male, female connotation. It's just that's the one they liked, and they're now playing and trying to grow the game over there.
That's really interesting. I mean, I wonder whether it stems from the fact that there isn't a long history of rugby in Asia, and therefore there isn't that kind of ingrown bias of, like football, for example, has been played for, you know, decades and it's been very male dominated. Whereas rugby, it's almost like a clean slate, where they have the opportunity to really showcase themselves and have their mark. And it's not, I think actually in Asia, in some countries, they're funding the women's teams more than they're funding the men because they're getting better results. So it's kind of flip the game a bit, I think, which is great.
Yeah, the China women's team is really strong. The Thai women's team is getting way more funding than the Thai men's team, it seems. And that's kind of a story that's repeated. But I reckon the reason, well, I know the reason for this is to break into the men's game is a lot harder than it is to break into the women's game because the men's game has been established a lot longer. Whereas the women's game, there's still it's kind of like a blue ocean opportunity if you look at it that way, as in you don't have to because the standard of the men's is probably a lot higher due to longer term investment. There's you don't have to well, you do have to do a lot of work, but the amount of work needed to break into the top higher ranks is it's more of achievable for
Absolutely.
governments that are looking to invest, and especially with the sevens, because that's now in the Olympics. So countries like China, they're investing heavily into their sevens team, but they invest nothing into their 15s team, or very little into their 15s team, because
Yeah,
that
that's really interesting. I think I've actually heard in general coaches talk about it in a very similar way. So there's coaches that are coming, male coaches that are coming through now that actually say, I prefer to coach women's teams, or I prefer to try to kind of develop women's sides, because there is that ability to go further faster, I think. And I think you're absolutely right. I think also, sevens lends itself to being a sport that can be taught, faster than the 15s, and you can bring in really great athletes and just sort of teach them the game. And so I think there's more scope for, that progression if you get the right athletes in, because a lot of it is so fitness based. And while skill is very important, I think, as you can see, the transferability when it is much higher, I think, than from other sports.
do you still play in any of the teams?
I do. I got injured actually playing sevens about 2 years ago, and I've been trying to recover since. I sort of get better, and then I injure the other knee, and then it goes back and forth. So I was playing quite regularly until then, but I have to say, as I get older, sevens is becoming much and much more difficult to play. I think it's, especially at a good standard, to go from, as a lawyer, I sit most of the day, to then, going and being so dynamic, and playing, especially in tournaments where there's a lot of rest, and then there's, these extreme bursts of energy that you need. I think for me it's becoming a bit harder. I remember when I was a bit younger, and we went to Amsterdam sevens, and I had to get out some sort of like due diligence document, and I was working until about 5 o'clock in the morning, and then we were up at 7 to go play Switzerland, and we played and we beat them. And I just remember that story so acutely, because I'm just like, I don't think I could do that anymore, But at the time, it was something that you just had to do it, so you did it. And the following day you'd have a nice sleep, and it was fine.
Who did you play for in
That
that?
was for Fine Rugby Now, so that was our
Ah,
FRN team. Yeah.
smash the bloody Swiss.
We did. It was actually hilarious because they kicked down, and I remember they had like three sets of coaches. They brought down these like coolers with all their ice and all these things. They were doing private, these proper warm ups. And I remember we like taxied over, and we were literally like running down, trying to get to the pitch on time for the match. And we somehow pieced it together, and we beat them, and they were furious. But it was a great little cap and memory to
Like
have.
it. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see what rugby's like in Central Europe outside of France and Italy and UK. Like, check out Switzerland. I've seen Sweden has quite a good rugby system over there. I've also been in touch with, I think, Croatia. They sent me a message saying to come over and check out the rugby. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of those countries actually initially talking about that kind of investment in rugby sevens. For example, the Netherlands, it was one of the first teams, I think, to have their women's sevens teams go professional, and they actually did very, very well at the start. And they were beating all the other sides because they weren't professional yet. So they kind of had dedicated budget, and they had, their athletes, and they were training them regularly. But then over time, other teams caught up. And eventually now Netherlands only puts out a 15 side. They don't even have a sevens team anymore, which is really sad. But their, results just kind of kept going down as other teams got better. But it was that first kind of, almost like an entry to market kind of thing where, if you were one of the first ones to go pro, you had a big advantage over other teams that, weren't training as much, etc. I think Sweden as well. So our coach Tamara Taylor, actually the coach of our FRN women's team, she coaches the Sweden national side, and I think they also only have a 15s team. So I think some of them, are focusing on just one, type of women's type of rugby because of funding issues. To be honest, I think.
What does the process of organizing a sevens tournament look like?
I think it really depends on the size and scope. If we look at one of the smaller events we organize compared to what we're trying to do at Lit Sevens, London Sevens, it's a huge, huge difference. I think, the basics are always the same, which is you want to obviously provide a good quality experience for spectators and for your players. I think the starting position always has to be, what kind of teams do you have coming? Because that then directs, what kind of what kind of referees you need, what kind of, rules you're going to have, what kind of amenities you have. So, for example, with London Sevens, we have we have Olympic quality referees who we have to pay quite a lot of money, and we have a judiciary, and it's all very formal, and we have three touch judges, assisting for every match, and it's very, very professional. For lit sevens, which I think is a good quality, but not quite that standard. We have local London referees that we obviously make sure we have the right caliber for the right match. But the elite sides will have extra referees assisting, but we won't for the social matches. I think you know there's a lot of health and safety issues you have to look into depending on the venue. Obviously, medical and physio you always have to cover. Entertainment, DJs, etc. There's a lot to consider, but I think sevens events I think are a fantastic way for rugby clubs as well to kind of encourage their community to get involved. Having days when they can come down to the club with the family, watch teams play, also kind of introduce themselves to the community. Because I think, at the moment, rugby clubs are kind of suffering. It's a difficult financial climate. So I think any chance to get the community involved, get some press down, get the neighbors to come around and watch, I think they're fantastic ways of sort of achieving that. I think more so than just rugby matches once a week, etc. So yeah, definitely, I think they're a great way of encouraging the community to get involved. But from a planning perspective, you do need the right people. But I think as long as the players are safe and they have a good quality of refereeing and the fixtures are done well, I think the rest of it is, you can do a variety of things with it.
100%. And what's been some of the biggest challenges organising the international London Sevens?
So the biggest challenge was it took the RFU and World Rugby 7 months to approve the event. So that was very challenging. So at the beginning of the process, when we found out that London Sevens at Twickenham wasn't happening, we sort of started looking into it. We applied for those permissions. And at the beginning, we had teams like Australia, New Zealand that were really keen to come. Of course, 7 months later, those teams had other plans, and we couldn't ask them to wait because we didn't know whether we would get permission or not. So I think that was very difficult. Then once we got permission, the original venue actually um, canceled on us with virtually no notice. So that was an issue. Then we had some international teams lined up from other countries that canceled last minute as well. So they confirmed, registered, everything, and then they because of visa issues or funding issues, etc., they couldn't make it. So there's been some you know difficulties to overcome. But I'm really happy with where we landed, and I'm happy that we have this event in the calendar, and there will be something where people can come and watch international caliber rugby sevens in the UK. I think it's really, really important because it's the only opportunity where most people have to watch that kind of level of rugby. And I think if it leaves the calendar, I think rugby sevens will really be forgotten in this country. I think we already don't have an England sevens team. And London sevens not being available is just further kind of eroding the public's awareness of the sport. So we felt really compelled to do something about it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the GB team is now Team GB. From an Olympics point of view, that is perfect because you're naturally training the team all year round together, and you're going to get better results at the Olympics. So 100% makes sense. From the outside point of view, I mean, I look at the rugby space and traveled with rugby, right? And the rugby space in Europe, well, in the Six Nations countries of Europe, is very heavily dominated by 15s. No rugby, not really any rugby league. and people don't really care that much about rugby outside of maybe Prem, URC, European, World Cup, Six Nations. And a lot of my mates will not watch Super Rugby, have no clue what's going on. Likewise with Rugby Championship, but even Rugby Championship, I think as a product doesn't have that same sort of prestige as Six Nations. And then outside of that, I think that's pretty much it for the rugby scene, as well as obviously playing for your local club. But maybe that's because that market is already saturated with enough rugby competitions going on as it is, compared to Asia, which is all rugby sevens, like tens and sevens. They don't have really a 15s game. One, because they don't have resources, and two, they don't have the the amount of players that would be needed for a 15 side. So yeah, it's interesting to that you mention it. The sevens game. You probably notice, because you're a lot more on the ground. You're a lot more organizing the grassroots. So you can probably tell and measure the popularity. How's the popularity sort of been? Do you see sevens in the UK, or let's say England specifically in Europe, growing in popularity, or do you actually think it is being sort of dying out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the RFU had a series called the 24/7 series that they were organizing, of which our event Lit Sevens was actually a part of. And in the first year, it did quite well. In the second year, COVID hit. And so essentially, there was, I think, 30 or 40 teams that 40 events that were a part of that series. And then there was about 7 events that were like kind of the key events that they were going to showcase. We were one of those 7. After COVID, the budget for rugby sevens in England completely died out. So, there was that series never reinvigorated, which is why we felt so passionate about creating the Lit Seven series to provide that platform. So I think at that point it became clear that 15s was sort of where, given budget constraints, where the money was going. I think there were it's really difficult to say because on one hand you now have the Super 7 series for the elite teams, and now you're going to have the Lit 7 series for the amateur teams, which is great. We have over 100 teams that have signed up. So that's great. One thing I've definitely noticed is that at least in the women's high kind of elite level, uh you probably have, I mean, maybe 100, maybe 150 women who are actually at that elite level. And on a tournament by tournament basis, those women just move from different team to different team. So they'll be playing for this team, Hammerheads one week, then they'll be playing for Wild Dogs, then they'll play for Kumas, then they'll play for Jesters, then they'll play for Wooden Spoon, then they'll play for us. And I think that is evidence that there is actually a shortage of elite women's players. There's not enough. So there are some teams, for example, Jesters, that had a women's side. They're not really running one at the moment. I know quite a few other sides that are struggling because other teams have taken their players. And so what we're trying to do with the Lit 7 series and with FRN is let's actually get women to that level where they're playing at that level. Rather than taking players from other teams, let's actually get players who haven't played at that level, introduce them to it, and see, if they can grow and improve. I think so. I think there is a shortage of women's elite players. I do think you are getting more and more women's teams that are playing on a social level, but maybe not regularly. So they'll play like 2 competitions. I'll give you an example. Lit Sevens this year has 23 women's teams, which is a huge number actually. It's probably one of the largest numbers. Now those teams, most of them are competing this series maybe 2, 3 times max. So I think you get teams that play sort of socially. They might do Bournemouth. They might do one of our tournaments or 2 of our tournaments. They might do a beach rugby tournament. So it's not like a consistent sevens experience and growth of sevens in the way that we're trying to do with the series. But there are people playing. I think there's also a phenomenon where clubs are using it as a way of raising money. So there'll be little social tournaments that pop up, and you get teams that aren't really serious sevens teams, but they'll just go and play. So that, that's great as well because it might introduce people to the sport. Is there a trajectory of huge amount of growth at the moment in sevens? I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe on the women's side, just because women's rugby in general is kind of growing. Maybe there is on the women's side a little bit, but I think, I mean, that is something that we really are trying to change and improve. I don't think there's been a huge decrease. I will say that, over the last few years, which is great. Um, but I think we definitely need to work at it. And I think it also depends where you are in the UK. So if you're in like Ireland, we used to have our men's rugby captain used to fly in for all the tournaments because he said there are no tournaments around where he lived. I think that's probably the case in a lot of other places as well. So, lit sevens and, a lot of what we do is very London centric, so where I am, there is a lot of sevens. And you could say, oh, there's loads of tournaments. But probably if you live 3 or 4 hours away from London, you would feel very differently. So I think, there is an increase in availability, but also I think that that region based is quite important to consider because it's not like you have equal opportunity in all parts of the country to play.
What's the end? What's sort of the end goal with Lit Sevens?
Um, I mean, the end goal is just to get more people playing sevens, and also to work with rugby clubs and hopefully support them and raise, kind of get more people into their tournaments so that they can raise money and, that can help them, survive, during the year because as you know, it's quite tough for rugby clubs at the moment. I think that's kind of the first goal of the series. I think the second is also to help players elevate them to another level. So, for example, either that can be just improving their skills over the summer, because you can definitely tell when a player's come back in September, October, and they've been playing sevens all summer. But also, I'll give you an example. We had a girl who came through. She played for Fine Rugby now. She played a couple tournaments, and then she played at Lit Sevens at our tournament, playing for our team. She got spotted by Saracens, started playing for Saracens, then she got spotted and she's playing for GB Sevens now.
Awesome.
So, it is a way for players also to get spotted, and, to distinguish themselves because obviously the nature of sevens is that you are much more isolated. There's only seven people on your side on the pitch. So if you are, perform well and if you're an exceptional player, you will be noticed. In 15 sometimes it might be harder to do if your team plays a certain way. So I think it's also a great opportunity for players who want to make their mark and get spotted, not just for sevens but also for 15s as well.
Do you see the the Lit Sevens series becoming like a professional sort of league?
I mean, what I would love to have is for it to have, which is what it does at the moment. So we have an open competition, which is essentially elite, and then we have a social competition. And I think it's really important to have the two. I know for example, other, competitions that just have elite level teams, the most common feedback is, well, they're boring. There's no music, there's no fun, there's no DJing, it's too serious, there's not enough spectators, there isn't that rugby atmosphere. So I think the social really contributes to the elite, and I also think the elite really contributes to the social because you get the social players who want to have a drink after and watch the elite players play. They, appreciate it. They might not be playing on that same level, but some of them, the social standard is actually very high right now, in these tournaments. So some of these players are borderline, professional as well, or borderline elite. So, that division as well is, I think, reducing as time goes on. But I think the two complement each other very well. And we feel very strongly as well that, the social side of it needs to be showcased as much as the elite. So at all of our Lit 7 Series tournaments, Pitch One is live streamed, and both the social competition and the elite competition get to play on there. So whether you are a men's elite team or you're a women's social team, you get to play on that main pitch. You get professional commentary. You get to have highlights reels after. You get photographers that photograph you, and I think that's really important because How does a amateur player progress to the next level if they don't have any footage of themselves playing? So that kind of thing, I think, needs to, is getting better. I think we're really trying to do that, have a lot more media stuff, have a lot more photographers, videographers at our events, and help players have that coverage, which they can then use to get to the next level as well.
It kind of reminds me of there's you've probably seen it, but in the US they've got a professional league called PR Sevens, I believe.
Yeah, I know the guys that run it very well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually spoke to them a few weeks ago because I was curious about how it was all going and how they're developing, and yeah, it's really really nice to hear about a professional league for sevens in the USA.
I think what they're doing out there is actually phenomenal. So I know Mike. I think it's is it not Tolkien, but Mike who's kind of one of the head guys who runs it, and it's interesting what they're doing over there because I think it's very much kind of top down in the sense of they've got a lot of funding, and they've got, I think, a really great plan. They have these amazing stadiums. They're paying the men's and women's athletes the same amounts. They're getting in Ruby Tui and all these like really great athletes from abroad to raise the profile of the game. And I think the idea is that they will develop it, and then the spectators will come, and then the crowds will come. So I think in this country, I think it's a slightly different way that we are growing the game, because obviously rugby is just much more ingrained here. You have grassroots rugby here. In the US, I think they're trying to build it. They're trying to build it from scratch almost. So it's slightly a different approach, but I think they've done a phenomenal job of, I think, raising the the sport in the UK, and just the attention that it's getting at the moment. And one of the things I'd love to do, and we've been talking to Mike about it, is getting a Lit Sevens and PR Sevens team, and having some competitions over here or over there. So we've got USA is sending a team down to the Lit Sevens, London Sevens. So there'll be some players in there that play for the PR Sevens, and yeah, trying to get that cross Atlantic partnership going will be great, hopefully for both sides.
Yeah, it's a win-win either way. Essentially, you're raising the profile of both. If you've got two successful tournaments, it's similar to what they did back in the day with the European Champions Cup, right? They had all
Yeah,
the different countries, and they're like, "Why don't we just all play each other?"
yeah, exactly. I think it's Mike Tolkien, by the way, is the
Mike
name.
Tolkien, yeah. I saw on your website Mike Friday left a cheeky review. Will he be at the London Seven Lit Sevens this year?
He will. He'll be there. I think he's bringing a couple of his sons as well, who also play. He Yeah, he's been actually phenomenal. He's been really great kind of advisor for me in putting this tournament on. He's been involved from the start, helping me kind of choose dates that we thought would work with the international calendar, and helping me put me in touch with teams and things like that. So he's been really great asset to the event, and I think he sees the value in it, because I think he knows that if this gap is not filled in the calendar in the UK, it will just go. And so I think a lot of teams, Mike, also, I have to say, Terry Sands from Shogun, Jonathan Hooper from Shogun, and David Mobbs from Jesters, they've been really great at kind of coming on board. Jonathan Lord from British Army, and just kind of supporting the event and being like, right, we trust you, we're going to believe in you to make it happen, because at points it was very touch and go.
Who's yeah, you mentioned some of the teams there. What's the sort of lineup of key teams that we got to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some great ones. So we've got Shogun Rugby. So every team is representing a country. So there's kind of I guess our perspective was, most people won't know the names of some of these elite teams, but so it's easier to cheer for a country. But of course, we always say represented by X. So we've got Shogun representing the UK. We've got Ramblin' Jesters representing Ireland. We've got our official charity, Rugby for Heroes, representing Fiji. We've got USA Development, who's bringing a team down in combination with NAV Sevens, which is a really high level US team. So it'll be a combination of USA Sevens players and some of their players. They'll obviously be representing the USA. We've got Jamaica, represented by the Jamaica UK Crocs. We've got the Lions and Lionesses representing Africa. We've got Find Rugby Now, our team representing Netherlands. So our women's team has, like 6 Dutch internationals in that team. And we have got Hammerheads representing GB. So they'll have a bunch of GB players playing, and the British Army representing Great Britain. I think I've listed everybody. I hope so. And Shogun obviously has a men's and women's team as well. So we've got 8 men's teams and 4 women's teams. That is sort of the maximum we could pack in into one day.
Yeah, because does everyone play everyone or?
So there's 2 pools for the men's and 1 pool for the women, and then I think depending on the results in the pool, they kind of see how they go on. So it'll be a really action-packed day from start to finish, and yeah, we're really trying to give the teams a great experience. We've got ice baths for them and professional physios and all their nutrition covered, and they're going to have a VIP area in the stadium so they can actually watch from up top. They were going to have a buffet, a private buffet that's all set up for them, some games to keep them entertained. So we've definitely done it in so that they have a very unique experience. For one, I've never had this experience in Hong Kong, Dubai, etc. So it would just be something different and hopefully something that, all the teams really, really enjoy.
100%, 100%. It's I'm curious, the GB players, will they not be playing in the Madrid Sevens the week after?
It's the week after, yeah. So I think I'm not sure how the selection will work. I know there was a few people that I saw Shogun put down, for example, Jasmine Joyce. But they did say she's probably going to be unavailable. So I think it will depend on selection, and that's the great thing. It's a pre-Olympic year, so it's a really great opportunity to watch some of these like top athletes. I know the USA Sevens is going to be sending down some players that are potentially in contention of the Olympics, and they want to see them play more. So, same thing with some of these other sides. So it's a really great opportunity to see the stars of tomorrow, but even the stars of today that a few weeks later, might be playing in the Olympics.
What's the story with Jamaican rugby? Because that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the background. They have a team that is basically a feeder team for the Jamaican national side. They're called the Jamaica UK Crocs. So a lot of the players live in the UK, but they will travel and compete. And I think one of their spotlight players, he actually they when they did their sort of spotlight on him, said he was one of the first people to score a try in the HSBC 7 series, etc. So they have some of their top guys coming down as well. But it'll be phenomenal to see them. We did a tournament in the Caribbean in Grenada a couple months ago, and they love rugby out there. I mean, they really do, and there's some phenomenal teams. So I'm excited to see how they perform. But they also always bring the vibes, so we're looking forward to that.
So is that in Grenada? Is that a tournament that you organised or that you sent your team to?
No, that we sent our team to. So there's a tournament called the Grenada Rugby World Sevens, which happens in December. We've been twice now, and we actually partner with them on our Lit Sevens tournament. So they usually come down and meet some of the UK teams and things. So if anyone's ever interested in December, getting out of the cold UK winter and going to the Caribbean and being on the beach and playing some very high level rugby, it's definitely one that they should consider.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Um, it's just crazy. People don't realize how much rugby there is out there across the entire world, and I just love how, like, I talk to my mates and they didn't even realize that rugby was a thing in Asia. They thought, oh, okay, they got the Japanese league, and you just go outside of Europe, and even just in Europe as well, there's so much rugby. Like in Germany, they've got a crazy system and league going on over there. It's almost they're investing loads of money into it. And then you go across to Romania, they've got a massive rugby scene. There's just too much, and I just want to go to all of it and see it all and travel the world and just see and record as much as possible.
I
Uh,
think that's the real beauty of rugby sevens, is that you can do that. So I mean, I was a very average player, and I've been able to play in Dubai, in Amsterdam, in countries all over the world, in Ireland, in Netherlands, and I can in Grenada, lots of places, and it facilitates those opportunities to travel, to meet friends from all over, to play. If let's say you have a serious job, to play, like I said, that happened to me, is just playing on the weekends or going away and just like making new friends. I have some close friends in Uganda. When would I have ever met anyone from Uganda? And I have a couple girls that I've been friends with for like 8 years. They've been playing for FRN for 8 years, and a few of them are actually going to be playing in London Sevens. They played for Uganda Sevens. One of them captains the Uganda 15 side. So it's just so cool, to be able to do that, and to kind of travel around and play, and rugby to be the facilitator of that. I think also, there's so many more opportunities available now than sort of when I was, let's say, at university. I know of quite a few people now going and moving to Hong Kong, playing in Hong Kong, um, having their job sorted and their accommodation sorted, and they get to go and play out there, live somewhere new for a couple years. I mean, how cool is that? So yeah, I think definitely, rugby sevens, I think especially, is really good at giving a chance to travel the world, as you were saying.
Yeah, and it's a passion of mine. I love traveling, seeing the world, meeting new people, new cultures. So I love combining all of that. Going back to the Lit Sevens, then. So we're bringing, or you're bringing together lots of people from lots of different backgrounds for a chance for an international tournament, and then you also have like a theme, right, for the sevens as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So our official charity is Rugby for Heroes. So they're a phenomenal organization that basically helps the military transition from kind of military life into kind of regular everyday life, etc. And they help put on courses and do other things. So they're our official charity. They're also going to be having a team on the day that's representing Fiji. All of their players are Fijian, and in honor of them, because it's Rugby for Heroes, the theme is heroes. So that can be interpreted in a variety of ways. It can be superheroes, it can be a soldier, it could be a doctor, it could be your parents, it could be anybody that you think is a hero, or obviously widely interpreted. So hopefully that will result in a lot of funny and interesting costumes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing some superheroes. That's for sure. And you, so you also got James Haskell DJing and a bit of entertainment, like a good old classic sevens tournament.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got some dance performances from phenomenal group called IMD Legion, which was on Britain's Got Talent. So they're like a combination of adults and kids, and they're going to be doing flips and really cool like dances and things like that during the intermissions. We've also actually got two really great presenters, Amy Humphreys, who's on Instagram as Rugby with Amy, and then Victoria Rush, who are kind of influencers and really understand rugby. They do these events all the time. So they'll be leading these fun presentations during, halftime and in between the different matches. And then we've got, three other DJs other than James Haskell involved as well, that will be kind of performing during the day with DJ Mojo, and Josh Christie. And then you've got James Haskell in the evening for the after party. So he's been amazing. Like, he actually was supposed to be in Monaco that evening, and he's flying to Monaco the following morning at like 6 a.m. so that he can come and make our event. So it's really great. And he's obviously a staple of the previous at London Sevens events, and he's also just a really great DJ. So it'll be great to have him along entertaining everybody.
Yeah, 100%. I'm looking forward to seeing how the weekend goes. And for people that are interested in going to the sevens, how can they come along? What's the important pieces of information that people listening to the podcast might need to know?
Sure. So the easiest way to get more information about us is just we're on at Lit Sevens on all the socials, or lit7s.com. So it's LIT, the number seven S. And all the tickets for London Sevens are being sold on Ticketmaster. They're £27 for adults and £15 for kids. And then the Lit Seven series, you actually don't need a ticket for any of the events except for the final one at Lit Sevens, and it's only like £12, and you can get those again on through lit7s.com or our Instagram page. So Yeah, we'd love to see you guys at one of the upcoming Lit Sevens events.
Well, Elaine, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about all rugby around Asia, around the world, and how sevens is developing in England. I think it's been very insightful for people that don't get to hear about the amateur game and how it's being developed on a grassroots level. So thank you for that. And Champagners, be sure to get down to the Lit Sevens. I think it's going to be a, well, excuse the pun, but a lit event for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. And do you have any final words of wisdom you want to leave the followers with?
Yeah, just I would just encourage everybody to try rugby sevens. I know, there's a stereotype that it's a game for backs, but I actually think as long as you're playing equal competition, it can be a fun game for anybody. And if you need any help finding a team, or you don't know how to get started, just shoot us a message on Instagram, and we will find you a team or put you in touch and get you going.
Well, there you go. No excuses, no exceptions now, guys. Get yourself down and play some sevens. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in the next episode.